Welcome back to Different Strings, a guitar podcast. This is the Music That Matters episode. Andrew, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
And Andrew, also tell us where people can find us on the internet, please.
You can find us, if you wouldn't mind, if you would please get to us, get at us, if you will, hit us at differentstringspodcast.com, where you can find blog posts, links to past episodes, and all other goodies as we continue to build our guitar adjacent empire.
Hold on a second.
It's touching, it's moving.
I need a tissue. So it's my turn to pick the music that matters. And I mentioned, if you listen to episode 11, where Andrew and I trigger each other and go at each other in an aggressive alpha male fashion, you would have noticed that I mentioned not one, but both of the bands. And this is the first time I'm going to combine albums. And they're two different bands, two different albums. And we talked extensively about the Mike McCready Fender Signature that cost $1,900 in that episode. But I'm here to tell you that in our Music That Matters segment, it is now time to take on grunge. And I'm gonna double album you here. And the two albums that I'm going to say are Music That Matters are Pearl Jam's debut, 10, and Nirvana's second album called Nevermind. Both of these albums came out in 1991, and these are widely recognized as landmark albums that signaled the true public rise of the worldwide grunge era that separated from all previous music, dominated the airwaves, changed fashion. That's how much these albums matter. They changed fashion, right? I grew up wearing dirty jeans with holes in them and flannel because, well, frankly, my father was enlisted military and we were poor as dirt, and that was all we could afford. Right? My mom didn't buy us new jeans till our asses were hanging out of them because she would just sew them up and iron on patches.
Yeah. Prince made that look popular at one point, didn't he?
Yeah. And I mean, I never felt more justified in my wardrobe choices than in 1991 when the video for Alive, Pearl Jam, their first video was Even Flow, I think.
Was it?
I don't remember now. I'd have to go back.
Was it Jeremy?
No, that wasn't their first video.
Okay.
But it was either Alive or Even Flow. And it's like, here is 5 guys on stage all wearing jeans and flannel. And I was like, my people. My people. Right?
My peeps.
And the dudes in Nirvana were like, they were the guys, they were the kids playing in your basement, dude. Right? They just looked like your friends.
Well, if you think about what we had just escaped in the 80s.
Spandex and Hairspray, baby.
I mean, not an approachable, relatable look.
Not everybody looks good in spandex, man, but everybody looks good in blue jeans and flannel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into this, right? These are landmark albums, both of them. They sound completely different, but when you take them together, they span what grunge music was all about. Guitar, bass, drums, and emotionally, socially aware lyrics that were sometimes shouted by marginally capable singers. So yeah, I am dissing the singers in both bands. Neither Eddie Vedder nor Kurt Cobain are excellent singers. Kurt Cobain has passed away. Eddie Vedder has not. Neither one of them is a great singer. I don't think anybody will argue with me, but I want to categorize that. I want to couch it a little bit by saying they were perfect for their bands. No doubt, 100% perfect. You put them in front of any other band, they don't work. You put any other band behind them, they don't work. They work in the context of their bands. Nirvana would not have been who they were without Kurt's vocals, but
Absolutely.
he was not a great singer. Um, Now let's take that a level deeper. With Nirvana, especially, Kurt and Chris Novoselic were not amazing musicians. Kurt Cobain was not an amazing guitar player.
If you define amazing as technically proficient.
Yeah, neither one of them, right? But once again, 100% perfect for Nirvana. You put somebody like you or me in Nirvana, it doesn't sound the same. It doesn't work.
Nope.
Right? Now, Stone Gossard and Mike McCready, the two guitar players for Pearl Jam, who have been in the band since the beginning, were definitely at the time passable guitar players. They weren't doing anything amazing, but they were both clearly proficient. I would say that Jeff Ament was probably the best technical player in Pearl Jam, the bass player, but technical proficiency was never the point of grunge. It's about raw emotion, the atmosphere, and it was about feeling something rather than being impressed by the musicianship
And the image.
and the image, right?
I mean, arguably the image became a thing,
Yes, not
but
in 1991.
but I think the music was at the forefront
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah, and I
Where
think
I think the coming out of the 80s, I think things had flipped.
yeah,
Music
and
was superfluous to the image.
exactly, and there are certainly technical bands from Seattle, which is where the grunge movement started. You've got Queensryche, one of the best progressive metal bands ever. You've got Alice in Chains, another awesome metal band. You've got Soundgarden, who was basically a progressive band that people lumped in with grunge. Okay, so there are a lot of technical skills in Seattle. That's just not what grunge was about. I think the thing that grunge did, and especially 10 and Nevermind, was it was something you could play. I can't tell you how many songs off of these two albums I taught my students over the years, because they were none of them was technical. They weren't hard to play, because that wasn't the point. The point was to make you feel something, to make you feel the music. Right.
Again, the image was approachable, right? Flannels and blue jeans.
Yeah.
The music was very approachable, both as a listener and a player.
Yeah.
And I think you hit on it earlier. The lyrical content was very relatable to
provided, of course, you could decipher the lyrics, because neither Eddie nor Kurt, they were both mumble mouths.
So I think what grunge was a return to the music being like for the listener again.
Yeah, it was, and I am not comparing these bands to the Beatles. I'm going to preface my next statement by saying I am not comparing Pearl Jam and Nirvana to the Beatles, but Pearl Jam and Nirvana in 1991 made kids want to play an instrument like the Beatles did when they showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show. Millions of kids saw the Smells Like Teen Spirit video. Millions of kids saw the videos for Even Flow and Alive and Jeremy and said, I want to play guitar, or I want to play bass, or I want to play drums. Just like millions of kids did when the Beatles showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't think you can overestimate that effect, right? But now when you kind of zoom in again and you look at the album, let's look at 10, right? You've got solid basic songs. There's not a lot of crazy, I don't think there's any time signature shifts on the whole album. You've got a minimum of key signatures, not a lot of guitar solos, although the guitar solo in Alive are excellent. Nothing amazing, just honest, hardworking creativity and a solid understanding of song structure, playing the instruments, and how to put the songs together in a recording studio. The first side, right? Although I don't think I think I had Nevermind on cassette, and I had 10 on CD. So there was no sides for Pearl Jam. So the first 6 songs on 10 include what I think are their best songs ever. 5 of their best songs ever. Once, Even Flow, Alive, Black, and Jeremy. Those are all on the first side of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not saying that I think the other 6 songs on the album suck. They absolutely do not. But there's a reason they're the back half of the album. All right, let's just get that right out. I mean, you listen to Nevermind. What do you got on the first side? Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are.
Mm-hmm.
Can you name any other song from that album?
I cannot.
Okay. Well, Lithium.
Lithium, I was going to say, yep.
Yeah. I had to look it up. Feel free to edit that out.
Yeah.
Now, I just said that Stone and Mike weren't amazing guitarists, but I'm going to amend that to say they weren't amazing individually. But when you put them together, that's when the magic happened. Stone played mostly Les Pauls, Mike played mostly Strats, and that is an absolutely classic tone combination that creates a sonic spread that'll make just about anybody happy. Right? And McCready's a pickup switcher. I've seen the videos. I've seen the video proof.
Yep.
Then you put Jeff Ament into the mix, playing fretless bass or 12-string bass, and now you have this album that is chock-a-block full of awesome textures.
Yep.
That all blend together really well. Now, jump over to Nirvana's Nevermind, and you have it's lightning striking, lightning in a bottle, right? Nirvana is one of those bands that was greater than the sum of its parts. You put any other 3 musicians together, you do not get the lightning strike that was Nirvana's Nevermind. And they were well known for using cheap gear because they destroyed a lot of stuff. So they didn't want to have expensive gear. Plus, Kurt was a lefty, so he had a hard time finding decent gear. Right? They built their style on huge dynamic shifts, going from super peaceful and clean to angry with heavy distortion. Not high gain, but heavy distortion, fuzz. Almost, it reminds me a lot of, like, think if you took the Carpenters and made them into a freaky psychedelic band.
That may be the first time I've heard the Carpenters and Nirvana mentioned in the same sentence.
It might be.
That was well done.
Right? Now, if you ask me, Nevermind has 4 amazing songs on it. Smells Like Teen Spirit, of course, Come As You Are, Lithium, and Something in the Way. Something in the Way makes me cry every time I hear it. I don't know why. It just, the tears start. That song pierces my heart.
Wow.
And the rest is filler. I know I'm going to catch a lot of crap for that, but the rest of Nevermind is filler. Now, it's good filler because the thing that sustains that album through its runtime is the attitude and the emotion and the dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of these bands were really breaking terribly drastic sonic ground, but in 1991 there were no bands on the radio that sounded like Nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
None. It's really easy in 2023 to look back and say, oh yeah, a lot of the grunge bands sounded the same and they had that clean verse and heavy distorted chorus.
Sure, because Nirvana started it.
Yeah, Nirvana,
and every record company and A&R guy
it.
was like, we need to do this again. Let's find more
and
of
over
that.
and over. And there were hundreds of bands out there trying to sound like Nirvana.
Yep.
I don't think anybody successfully ended up ever sounding like Pearl Jam because of the interplay between Stone and Mike.
No, I think the only, I mean, I don't want to downplay, there were other successful bands coming out of that era. One band that everyone accused of trying to sound like both of those bands was Stone Temple Pilots. And if you
Yeah.
listen to their
They don't sound like
debut
either one of
record,
those bands.
well, if you listen to their debut, which was Core, you could hear Nirvana influence and hear Pearl Jam influence. But I don't even want to call them influence, because maybe what you heard was the fact that all of those bands were influenced by the other same band, which was Led Zeppelin and the Ramones
Yeah.
and other
Yeah.
punk. But okay, I digress. Stone Temple Pilots, other like their future recordings were nothing like the first one.
Correct.
Way more musically intricate, way more diverse, and they're also, I would argue, not grunge either, but they
Yeah. I
were
wouldn't call them
popular
a
at a
grunge
time
band.
when grunge was the thing, and it just seemed like
Yeah.
everything that was rock was grunge. But
Yeah.
again, I digress. So, um,
You
I
want me to keep
remember,
going? I'm ready to keep going. What were you going to say? You
sure.
remember what?
Well, I remember where I was the first time I heard both of these albums.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a guy that I was in a band with, um, had introduced me to a bunch of records all at the same time,
Yeah.
or in bands. One of them was Fishbone. One of them was a band called Firehose. Bass player was Mike
Something,
Watts.
something, love of a lifetime.
No, no, that's Firehouse.
What'd you say?
Firehose.
Oh, completely different band.
Yeah.
Sorry. I apologize to all the Firehose fans out there.
Look up Firehose and Mike Watt. Mike
Okay.
Watt or Mike Watts. Okay. Um, Prong,
Oh,
Prong,
I
Prong.
love Prong. Snap your finger, snap your neck.
That's Prong.
I love that song. I love that
Okay.
album.
He introduced me to Fishbone, Firehose, Prong, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana, all in the same sitting.
Oh my goodness.
Before this, I was on a steady diet of 80s metal and Rush.
Yeah. Well, understandable.
Right.
Changed your life, didn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Oh, and sorry, there was another band, Primus.
That Sailing the Seas of Cheese album
Mm-hmm.
is one of the weirdest, awesome albums I think I have ever purchased.
They only get weirder as they progress, but
Yeah. I mean, uh, every time I listen to that album, I hear something that I never heard before.
yeah. So, oh, and Soundgarden.
Yeah.
I'm leaving. Okay. So you can.
What was your first Soundgarden album? Do you remember?
Bad Motorfinger?
Bad Motorfinger. Okay.
Yeah. So, this one person introduced me to all of this music. I don't think all of it was in the same sitting, but this one person had introduced me to all of this music at one point or another.
Are you still
And
friends with this guy? Because you probably should be. He's got amazing taste in music.
no, but I remember really, really liking 10 a lot.
Yeah.
I remember not liking Nirvana, Nevermind, a lot. However, I do remember how much Pearl Jam changed, for me at least, my outlook on music.
Yeah.
Like, I was, I could see it was, he introduced me to 10 before they were getting big. Like, it was just as it was breaking, and we just couldn't believe that music was starting to sound like raw again. Like, it
Yeah.
sounded like those five guys recorded that album in the same room.
Yeah. It
That
really
energy
did.
had that
Yeah.
energy, right?
Yeah.
And how different like how music was evolving from the 80s, where image was more important. And
Yeah.
like what I remember thinking, and he and I discussing, because we were in a band together, and what we were talking about was, this may actually open the door for us.
Yeah.
They gave us hope.
Yeah.
These bands gave us hope. They looked like us. They sounded angry like us. They sounded like we felt at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
They were a representation of what we were and what we wanted to be. And it was, when I say approachable, I mean, like, not just musically and not just you know, lyrically, like every way. We were like, this might be the resurgence of rock that we need right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
And you
even though
and
like
you
I
didn't have to know
wasn't,
how to sweet pick.
no, right. Yeah, it was like all of a sudden it was like the pressure was off as a guitar player.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I never wanted to be that guy. And now I'm like, here's validation that I don't need to be that guy to be something,
Yep.
to enjoy music. I don't have to keep going this route because, like you said, things were just getting more technical and technical and technical,
Yeah.
and guys were getting faster and faster and faster. And it was just, it was, we had a breaking point. It was like enough was, I didn't even like listening to that stuff, that shrapnel metal blade
Yeah.
stuff that was coming out. It was just boring and it was nothing fun about it.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
boring
and
and
you're never going to be a better guitar player than Marty Friedman.
mm,
Not ever.
so
Like
why
it's not going to
try?
happen. I don't care
Right.
who you are. I don't mean
Mhm.
you. I mean anybody.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm not even going to be as good as Vito Bratta. You know, I loved listening to White Lion, even though it was a really kind of cheesy band lyrically because of Vito Bratta. Amazing, amazing guitar player.
Yeah.
But it was also frustrating because like I can't play those songs.
Mm-mm. And I don't, and it's like I just gave up wanting to
Yeah.
try to be. So there was a lot of, there was a, to me, this was a, it's like a really important, like, I know that music in general goes through these phases that
Yeah.
seem to follow the decades to some extent. And as important as the 60s and the music was for that time, I feel like grunge was that important
Yeah.
at that time. I'm not saying the 80s music wasn't important to the 80s kids, but I don't think it was nearly as important as
Certainly,
the
certainly,
90s.
certainly not at the rate that they shuffled it off of their out of their CD players and off the
Seriously.
radio.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Like
grunge was
you didn't
not
hear Bon Jovi on the radio again for 14 years.
right. Grunge was not just about music, it was a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I know we joke about it now, but remember how much patchouli used to smell in after,
Everywhere.
right? Like, grunge just became a lifestyle and a way of thinking. And for better or worse, in some cases, like everyone just got, like we talk about it now, but like everyone just, it was a very depressing decade, the 90s. It
Yeah.
was, you know, it was becoming clear that the baby boomers were destroying the country. We were, you know, there was a lot going on in
They're
society
still
at that
doing it.
time. I know. um
That's not what we're here to talk about, though.
no, different show. But I feel like the 90s and the grunge and the lyrical content, I feel like it would touch the nerve. It was a
Yeah.
really important start. It was a start of something really important for kids back then. And
Yep.
so
Absolutely.
I will always have a soft spot for these albums because of what they did. Unfortunately, like for me, like it didn't start a love affair with either band, but there's no shortage of incredible music that came out following
Yeah.
that,
Absolutely.
in those footsteps. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I remember where I was when I heard both of those albums. I remember thinking like, this is big. Like this is a big deal.
Yeah. I went over to my friend Eric's house, which is where my band practiced in his parents' house basement. And he said, "Hey guys, I want to play this song." Because we did about 50% covers in the band at that time. And he put a cassette in and he played Smells Like Teen Spirit. And we listened to the whole album instead of practicing that night. We listened to the album probably 3 or 4 times. And then the last thing we did before we broke up for the evening was we went back and we learned Smells Like Teen Spirit, except for the lyrics. Tom needed some time to get the lyrics under him. But
Mhm.
we had the song, but we listened to it 3 or 4 times and we had the song. We knew how to play the song. It wasn't hard. Um, and that was before they were on the radio, but they were already um, you know, they were already starting to get well known. Tom also
Mhm.
introduced me to Pearl Jam. He worked at a record store. So Um, he knew about them, but we played Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are in our sets. We were playing 3 sets a night, um, and that band that I played in with Eric and Tom, we did a medley of the first 4 big singles from 10. I think it was Even Flow, Alive, Even Flow, Once, Even Flow, Alive, and Jeremy, kind of in that order.
Mm-hmm.
And then I played in a band that was playing Black, I want to say as late as 2008, and people still loved it. It went over well no matter where we were playing. When we did a tour of the West Coast in 2007, we've put that in our set if we had to play more than 45 minutes, and people loved it. Eventually we just started playing it every night because people loved it so much.
Right. So, so I mean, obviously there's no question that Pearl Jam had probably one of the greatest debut albums in music history. Would you
Oh,
say that?
100%. I would
I
put
mean,
I would put 10 up with any of the great debut albums. Guns N' Roses, right? Led Zeppelin, the first Led Zeppelin album, um, Boston's first album, which I think is amazing. Queen's first album, which is, I think, kind of the 10 of 1973, if you will, if you allow me that conceit. Who else had really amazing debut albums? BC Boys, 9 Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, right? These are all bands that had titanic debut albums that galvanized music fans.
mm-hmm.
And I put Pearl Jam right up there in that list of heavy hitters with the debut album. I have their follow-up album, which is called Verses, and I've never heard anything. I've never bought another album. I've heard songs over the years. I've never bought any of their other albums. I never had another Nirvana album other than Nevermind. It's the only one I got. I didn't like Bleach and In Utero. I heard the songs on the radio. I didn't need the album. And no matter how influential I think these albums were, and they were, not a lot of guitar solos. And I don't tend to listen to bands that don't have a lot of guitar solos. There are some exceptions. I listen to Gojira, not a lot of guitar solos. That might be all I can think of right now. But so the 2 bands didn't necessarily appeal to me long term, but I still listen to 10. I actually don't own a copy of Nevermind right now. I went looking for it. I could have sworn I'd had it on CD, but I'm wrong. I had it on cassette, and I gave away all my cassettes a couple dozen decades ago. And from a certain perspective, I'm looking backwards. We're looking backwards and saying how influential grunge was and how it really, in my opinion, started with these 2 albums.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about we talk all the time about how grunge killed hair metal, right? We do. It's a common trope in guitar player discussions of a certain age, guitarists of a certain age.
I mean, if anything, I don't know that it did kill it. I think it made it change.
Yeah.
Right. But in a way, it kind of killed it.
Yeah. And I would say it maybe needed to die in the form that it was.
I think it had reached peak ridiculousness.
Yeah. And that's a good time. And grunge died out when it reached peak ridiculousness.
Yeah, because it did. It hit like it hit a point where we were getting inundated with copycat bands.
Yeah. And you couldn't tell them apart.
And, or like, just, I think there was some folks at some record companies or A&R dudes that were like, okay, well, just sign anything that was remotely close to,
they started expanding the radius out from Seattle.
Right. And it was just,
Portland. Yeah. Get those guys.
And to me, it was a lot of throwaway bands that if you look back, if you listen, that if you couldn't name any of them there were just so many bad ones that didn't leave a mark.
There were other really good grunge bands. I'm gonna list a couple of them off for you. Um, Screaming Trees had an album that came out um, basically 91 or 92 called Sweet Oblivion. Amazing album. L7 put out Bricks Are Heavy in 1992. Now they were on the much heavier side of grunge. There's a band called Tad. They did an album called Eight Way Santa. Fantastic album. And Babes in Toyland did an album called Fontanelle right around all this same time, 91, 92. All great albums.
Okay.
All great grunge bands. Now, I get a lot of flack from people because I don't consider Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, I don't consider them grunge bands. To me, I said Alice in Chains is a metal band and Soundgarden is a progressive band. Now, maybe they had some grunge tendencies, but they had way too many guitar solos. Guitar solos were not a hallmark of grunge music.
Well, Alice in Chains had plenty of solos, but
Yeah.
Soundgarden, I don't know if I,
Well, I don't know
I-
if Kim Thale called them guitar solos, but they were places where in between the vocals, the guitar was doing something that wasn't just a rhythm track.
yeah, I don't know.
He
I
was
mean,
a
I don't,
noisier guy.
the good news is we don't have to pigeonhole them just because there was a genre, but
Right. But
I don't know. Like,
Soundgarden's songwriting was too intricate and too varied with tunings and time signatures and shifting tempos and all that kind of stuff. They were not a grunge band.
Very Led Zeppelin-esque.
Yeah, and they don't sound like grunge bands to me.
No, I think the drumming is too many polyrhythms, and
Yeah.
Chamberlain was just sick. And Chris is
Matt
a
Cameron?
vocalist. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Matt. Yeah.
Chris Cornell as a vocalist.
I mean,
Yeah.
the antithesis of grunge in that he was a very, very talented vocalist, as
Yeah.
was Lane Staley from Alice in
Uh-huh.
Chains. And I feel like that's not what grunge really was.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Right. That's why
Right.
I don't put Stone Temple Pilots there, because Scott Weiland was a very talented vocalist. Like, I just don't, I'm not saying that's, I define grunge and so what I say goes, but I'm saying if you think of grunge and you think L7, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, the vocals aren't like the selling point. The lyrics.
No, not at all. The lyrics yeah,
were,
absolutely.
The vocals weren't.
Yeah. And I would say that the grunge bands were influenced by Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. I feel like, especially the early Seattle movement, there were a lot of bands who were like, they saw Alice in Chains, they saw Soundgarden, and they wanted to be in bands. So they started bands, but they couldn't play that stuff.
Right.
And what came out was the grunge.
Mm.
And let's pause for a moment and talk about Dave Grohl as a drummer.
Must we talk about Dave Grohl
as a drummer?
Because not as a frontman / guitar player for the Foo Fighters.
Foo Fighters is not a grunge band. Foo Fighters is a modern hard rock band.
Alternative. I agree.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't even call them an alternative band. Anyways.
What would you like to say about Dave Grohl?
Here's what I would like to say about Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl made Nirvana sound the way they did. Even though we focus on Kurt Cobain, you put any other drummer in that band and they don't sound right. They don't get on the radio. Because Dave Grohl drove the dynamics of that band, and he was an amazing drummer. He still is an amazing drummer. Right? And I don't think anybody would argue with me now to call Dave Grohl one of the world's best rock drummers. I don't think anybody would argue with me with that. And I don't think, but back then, and this is how I know he was so influential, right? Because back then he was nobody. He was just this guy in Nirvana, right? But I remember going to gigs and the bands that we played with, it seemed like every other drummer was suddenly playing really hard and playing the Dave Grohl beats.
Hmm.
Right? People were in 1992 trying to be like Dave Grohl,
Yeah.
and it, it he's continued to be an influence on rock and roll. I mean, I think he's one of the all-time great frontmen as the head of Foo Fighters, because there isn't anybody I see out there having more fun being in a band than Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
And
He's like rock royalty right now.
yeah, and he's once again, he's not an amazing guitar player, but he sure is a pretty amazing songwriter.
Hmm.
And my favorite Foo Fighters albums are some of the early ones when he was most of the band.
Hmm.
But I also like their last couple albums a lot when now they've got 6 people in the band full time.
Hmm.
And I think that they're doing a lot of stuff. And
It was
uh,
really cool watching Dave Grohl in Nirvana.
yeah,
He was like the human equivalent of the Muppet animal.
yeah.
He was fun. He was just pure energy.
There was so they've tried several times to reboot the Muppet Show. You know this, right? And
Sure.
they ended up doing one that was formatted kind of like The Office, where Miss Piggy was she was a talk show host and the Muppets ran the show.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's not bad. If you have the Disney Plus, it's on there. It's worth watching.
That's
Um, it's not really for kids because there's some grown-up themes. I mean, Kermit has a type. Let's just say that, get that right out there.
okay.
Um, but there's one of these Dave Grohl guests on an episode, and he challenges Animal to a drum off. And I'm
Okay.
not going to spoil it for you because clearly you
Thank you.
haven't seen it, but you need to see this. It's only 2.5 minutes, but it
Okay.
is 2.5 minutes of must see television.
Okay.
It's fantastic. You'll probably find it on YouTube somewhere.
But
Um,
the thing is that,
he was a human embodiment of Animal.
and he was like, just like Pearl Jam made a lot of kids run out and buy guitars,
Yeah.
Dave Grohl made a lot of people want to play drums.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's
I
nothing wrong with that.
remember hearing Nirvana songs come out of the drum room at my shop for a lot of years because and he was and is a truly gifted drummer. There's just no two ways around it.
Hmm.
And that I think more than anything else was kind of the amazing thing about Taylor Hawkins, in that they bonded so tightly and so quickly that a lot of times you can't tell if it's Taylor or Dave. They played so similarly to each
Hmm.
other.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Taylor.
So Pearl Jam 10, Nirvana, Nevermind.
Pearl Jam 10, Nirvana, Nevermind. Absolutely, positively music that matters, Andrew.
I can't argue with that.
No, you really can't.
Nope. And I'm usually right about almost everything.
So, folks, thanks for tuning in for another Music That Matters segment here
No,
on.
thanks, by the way, for taking me back to a time of my life that I don't really think about all that often, to be
You're
honest.
welcome.
Yeah,
You're
that was an
welcome.
interesting time for me.
Did you enjoy going back and listen to these 2 albums? Had forgotten a lot of the Nirvana stuff.
Um, so full disclosure, I
You
did
did,
not go back and listen to
Andrew.
them.
Oh,
But I will.
okay.
But I will. Um, I don't have to listen to 10 because
No,
I will tell you, I honestly listened to that album so much when it came out. I front to back, as far
yeah,
as I was concerned, there were no filler went back then. Um,
nope.
but I do want I have to go back and listen to both albums just to be
Yeah,
fair.
great stuff.
So yeah.
And I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to Bad Motorfinger again, because that's a stellar album.
I don't have to. That's probably one of the heavy rotation albums in my life. Right. I never stop listening to This is such a I can't don't even get me started on that record. We don't have time for that.
No, no, we don't.
But Bad
I I
Motorfinger,
I came
unbelievable.
I actually came into Soundgarden at Louder Than Love, and I was like, wow, this is terrible. I did not like it. I didn't like it at all.
Interesting.
So a couple years later, imagine I'm sitting downstairs in my parents' basement in 1990, probably early 1992, and it gets to be late at night when the really good hard music is coming on MTV, and I think I don't think it was the first video they did from that album, but the song Jesus Christ Pose came on.
Oh,
Super,
interesting.
super freaky video,
Yep.
but just a crushing song,
Oh
an
yeah.
absolutely crushing song. And it came on at the end and said Soundgarden. And I'm like, there is no way this is Soundgarden. I
Yep.
hate Soundgarden.
Yep. Not
And
anymore.
sure enough, it was Soundgarden. I went down to the record store the next day and bought the album. And oh my
Yeah.
goodness,
That's a stupidly good album.
from stem to stern,
Yep.
right? That
Yep.
and Super Unknown,
Yep.
just stellar albums. Not
All right.
grunge, not grunge.
Not grunge. All right. Good
So
one. Good pick.
you're picking next time.
I don't know what's on the agenda. I'll have
That's
to come
okay.
up with a good one.
That's all right. By the time that episode comes out, we'll all know.
Exactly. Thank you. All right. Good episode. Thank you for picking some cool stuff.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope everybody else did. Don't forget to join us on the web at differentstringspodcast.com and tell us in the comments what your favorite grunge album was. And
make sure it's grunge or we will gatekeep.
Yeah, make sure it's grunge. And if you can remember when you first heard it, tell us that too. Tell us the story behind your first grunge album.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Take it easy, everybody.
Peace.